Yeah, well, I wanted to do a brief introduction and recording of the intro to Management 251 OPPM. So let me get right to it and try and keep this a little bit brief. Okay. Right. So for the course, and I'm just going to roll through these slides rather than, do the download and so forth, a little bit less memory this way. But for the semester, we will be talking about operations management, but there are also elements of product management and production management contained within, which is why I kind of refer to this as OPPM. So when we start to look at operations management, we think, well, what is it? And the textbook definitions are basically the process of administration of business operations and, blah, 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 what you can see on the PowerPoint slide here. And obviously, towards achieving a certain set of outcomes, specific goals, which include profitability and productivity. We focus on costs, we focus on revenue, we look for the highest, perhaps, net operating profit possible. And so we will be concentrating on some things like optimization and so forth. But it has everything to do with the elements of the corporation and how we achieve this business model success going forward. Other strategic issues include things like the size of manufacturing plants, or if we're in the service industry, it might be the size of, an imaging center, MRIs and things like that. And we look at project management methods, things like work in process, inbound logistics, which may be raw materials, or it may be something different if we're in the service sector. We look at quality, and that is sometimes in terms of overall Kaizen, but also individual Kaizen, meaning the idea of constant improvement and trying to be the best we can. So we talk a little bit about Six Sigma and so forth. So, whether it involves material handling or just dealing with service issues, supply chain is a critical aspect of OPPM. And supply chain involves this idea of logistics, understanding what global trends might be influencers, demand forecasting, and resource availability, and so forth. And we learned that during the COVID debacle. 10 key functions of OPPM include finance and accounting, supply chain management, production management, inventory management, quality management, business forecasting or demand forecasting, strategic planning, and so forth. We're also interested in business process management, product design, and human resource management, and how they relate to some of the other elements that we're speaking of. Finance and accounting, for example, accounting deals with all the transactions within a company, and there obviously must be policies and procedures for expenses, data management, the creation of financial reports, and so forth. The data provided shows where efficiencies can take place, and it attempts to identify things like fraud and misuse and the like. Supply chain management, the process of controlling goods and services as they move from different states, raw materials to finished and delivered goods, is crucial to the OPPM environment. The focus here is to streamline the channel to increase value for the customer and profits for the producer. And we can see we start from something like raw materials. We apply over time that special human know-how and ability, and we end up with an outbound element geared toward the consumer and ultimately geared toward our profit as well. The production management side of this is turning resources into goods and services. It's about controlling the activities that are involved in making those goods and services, and it recognizes somewhat the more traditional POLC, planning, organizing, leading, and controlling elements, but we add to that things like quality, expense, quantity, and so forth. So we can look and see the functions of production management include the selection of product and design, production process, production capacity, production planning, production control, quality and cost control, inventory control, and then maintenance and replacement of machines or other, should that be a service environment issue. Inventory management. Well, managers have to identify which and how much stock they need to order for a product, a service, when they need it. And typically we try to apply that idea of just-in-time delivery because there's great expense in storing things, the idea of inventory, carrying large inventories. There's insurance costs, there's the out-of-pocket to purchase that material, and so forth. There's shrinkage, theft, and so forth. So we try to mitigate some of that using the process of just-in-time delivery. And, we still also have to monitor demand and identify trends because there's nothing worse than going into I don't know, a Walmart on a Saturday looking to purchase something and somebody telling you, well, it's at the warehouse. We can have it here Tuesday. Well, I didn't come to the store to get it today to have to wait till Tuesday. So inventory management becomes a bit of a balancing act sometimes. The idea of quality management, and quality is kind of an abstraction. What is quality? For example, I want to buy a quality car. Well, what is that? A Benz? And what makes Benz, Mercedes or other a quality car? It only breaks down 5 times a year instead of 10. That's the metric for quality. So ensuring the quality of the product or service being produced falls under the idea and the umbrella of quality management. It's about reviewing all of the activities, the tasks, procedures, et cetera, to make sure that they are meeting the quality expectations forecast and set. Business forecasting, especially demand forecasting, but this is the use of predictive analytics included in the idea of forecasting trends and sales and demand and so forth. These are both quantitative and qualitative, used to make informed guesses, so to speak, based on certain business metrics. The more accurate the forecasting, the better the optimization of costs and profits to the firm. Strategic planning. Well, when we think about strategic planning, it's how an organization's leaders figure out what their vision for the future will be. They use this vision to define the company's goals and objectives, and this ultimately becomes the driver and direction finder for the company and its employees. So it's the idea of a planning cycle, goals, desired outcomes, the strategies used to reach that measurement so that we have kind of a complete feedback loop. And we look at the results and decide if we have to go back and tweak or fix something that may be defective or not meeting expectations. Business process management is the integrative process perspective that has everything to do with what Dr. Randy Polman referred to as value-driven management. This is basically the value over time argument, and we're going to be speaking at some length about this. And that this involves also Porter's value chain proposition and things like Porter's 5 forces and so forth in our strategic decision making. Product design, well, this is the path to achieving high consumer satisfaction, crucial to attracting the customer from the expanse of choices available, and really addresses the issue, why does the customer want what we're offering? In a sense, why do they want to buy from us versus somebody else? Now, HR, or human resource management, excuse me, let me take a quick sip of tea here. Is sometimes different than what we perceive it to be. First of all, we never should lose sight of the fact that HR does not work for the individual in the firm. HR is paid by the firm. It's a tool of the firm. It works for the firm. Human resource management involves recruiting the right people, hiring the right people, deploying and managing the company's employees or human assets, if you will, in the right ways. To optimize what? Well, to optimize operations, minimize costs, maximize profits. Part of it has to do with the strategic match of skills against the company's needs, and it's always about getting the best qualified for the required tasking. Human resources are, after all, the repository of corporate learning and knowledge. Components of OPPM are all of these. Now, I'm not going to read them all to you, but quality is a function, purchasing is an issue, forecasting, location strategies, just in time delivery, which we spoke of, MRP, material resource planning, PQM, total quality management, inventory management, scheduling, performance, and we measure that in a lot of different ways, maintenance, facility layout, and so forth. These are the 12 components, essential components of OPPM. The six that we will entertain this semester involve quality, forecasting, scheduling, MRP, inventory management, and facilities layout. We can't cover everything in a reasonable fashion, so we're going to do our best in these areas. And there are several topics that are going to be the tools that we use. And these tools include forecasting tools, including the measurement of error, using whether it's standard deviation or some other measures, and we'll talk about that. The idea of expected value and what is associated with expected value, how we calculate that, and what we're actually looking at. We're going to use Solver, Microsoft Solver, as one of the tools for optimization, and that will be a key component of your final deliverable. We're going to use PERT CPM, Program Evaluation and Review Technique, which was more of a military function from the Polaris program in the 60s, the Polaris missile program. But we're going to spend a significant time on CPM, the critical path method, and what that means and how we account for time and throughput and things like that. So that'll be a big factor. The trade-off matrix, because again, it's always the relationship between cost and other things. Remembering that in OPPM, the triple constraint is always present. It's omnipresent. And the triple constraint, in a very street way of saying it, is time, money, and specifications. And we'll talk at great length about that. And then Betty's Bats, which is our final deliverable that we're going to be looking at as our final metric of measuring our outcomes in the course. PERT CPM will do something like this. We have an activity, building a house, building a car, baking a cake, changing a tire. And we have all kinds of different activities we're going to talk about, but they're the activities associated with a specific tasking. So changing a tire, to keep it simple. Well, first, activity A would involve something, then activity B. Activity A might be simple as pull off to the side of the road. Activity B, turn on the four-way flashers. Activity C, get the tools and the spare and other things out of the trunk. Activity D, loosen the lugs on the tires, and so on and so forth. And we're going to associate start times and finish times, earliest start times, earliest finish, latest start, latest finish. And that's going to tell us something in the OPPM environment and process. Trade-off matrix. And we'll spend a little bit of time on this. Hayes and Wheelwright spent an awful lot of time on this production process matrix. So we'll be talking about that at some length. The idea of expected value I mentioned is the idea of, coming up with what the outcomes are, almost like our averaging techniques. When we saw, a symbol like X bar, and we said, well, what is that bar on top? Well, it means expected X or expected Y or so. Well, expected value. What are the expected outcomes? Well, in our case, the interest is going to be the expected outcome, or the outcome of, for example, X, whatever that might be, is really the sum of the X's times the probability of that X. So the sums times the probabilities, and we'll talk at length about that. And we'll be doing things like probability trees and so forth. And that's part of what we'll be coming up with. And we'll figure out how to work from the right, coming left, to backtrack and assign probabilities and expected outcomes and so forth. Some of this is the idea of decision trees, and we will be using sequential decision trees where we deal with nodes and arcs and what they mean. Uh, One of the textbook examples is this company called Southern Textile, and we'll be talking about how they decide on making decisions. And a lot of that has to do with corporate governance, and we'll see that in the mix. We will calculate the expected values based on some of those outcomes and decisions that we make. And then ultimately, as we see, these values will be applied and we'll have some outcomes, although we won't directly quiz for this, and we'll talk about that. We'll put together production worksheets in one form or another and look at the time constraints associated. Again, time, money, specifications. We'll look at process sheets, and today everything is obviously digitized. We're not filling in process sheets, but the functions are still the same. So we're going to talk about what that means to us. We're going to talk about production operations, and specifically when we look at your final deliverable, it involves several production operations, and we'll talk about that during the semester. We'll talk about production line layouts as it applies to this final project of ours called Betty's Bats. And this relates to how we might lay out in the real world a factory, whether we're making lawnmowers or cars, or in the service sector, whether we're doing, for example, medical imaging. How many MRIs do we have? How many X-ray suites do we have? And so forth. When we look back at throughput, we'll think back to even World War II, when at the height of the war, the production was one of these so-called Liberty ships that was used to transport goods and ammunition and food and everything during a crucial time when the Brits were getting the wind knocked out of them, back in the war. At the height of the war and the height of production, we were able to manufacture and push out a finished Liberty ship at a rate of one a week once the queue was filled. Now imagine, think about this. We're starting with raw inbound product, inbound logistics. It's pipe and steel and paint and wires and so on and so forth. And imagine taking all of that stuff and you're telling me in a week we're going to have a finished kit? Well, the answer is yes, but what's of importance here is once the queue is filled. And we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not too dissimilar from an automobile assembly line. A completed car typically comes off the assembly line every 18 to 35 hours. You mean in 18 hours, somebody can take just steel and tires and wires and all of this and push out a car? Well, again, once the queue is filled. And so we'll talk about Betty's Bats, our final deliverable in that context. We'll also talk about things like capacity, how much is needed. And in the context of Betty's Bats, that's going to be important to us. We'll have a data sheet that'll guide us, but we're going to have to figure some of this out. And then we're going to look at Betty's Bats in terms of what the typical bat making process actually is. And so there's a video, which I'm not going to play here, but we'll be able to look at that. Then we're going to look at the optimization because again, once we make the bats, got to do something with them. We have to inventory them. We have to, ship them to warehouses to be distributed and so forth. And of course, it's not as simple as saying, well, let's just take everything we make in this plant, everything we make in this other plant, and ship them to some location that may or may not have the capacity to handle all of that. Well, we're going to decode some of that and so forth. Tropic Sun to Betty's Bats. The example in the classroom we're going to use is something called Tropic Sun, and there's plenty available in the content section, and there will be more. And this Tropic Sun, once we get to the optimization area of the semester, will remarkably, and I say remarkably, look like Betty's Bats, and we'll discuss what that actually means. All right, so basically, for the course, content section is very important. Got to cover pretty much everything that I post in there at some point and in some form. That's what's going to guide you more than any textbook. Yes, the textbook is a great reference section, and we will be probably doing an awful lot of this, especially for the online course. We'll probably be doing a lot of this, remotely. So you're going to rely on videos and things like that. The message board is going to be very important to you. And if you have any questions or concerns, we can always set up a private Zoom. So, keep that in mind and keep my emails, close by, because we'll contact back and forth that way and the message board and so forth. So let's start the semester by looking at the syllabus. This is not going to be anywhere nearly as tough a semester as you think. You'll find out when we get our first, in quotes, class. And for those that are doing this asynchronous remote, non-synchronous online, I'll be posting a lot of this stuff on the message board, what's due and so forth. We have a tentative schedule in the syllabus, but don't be overly alarmed and so forth until we start the semester and we start to chat a little bit. So with that, that's a short introduction. Blessings to all. Start looking at the content section, look at the syllabus, and I hope you have played or are playing this video. Blessings to all. Have a great day.